The whole town watched her get pushed into the dirt, until the one cowboy everyone feared stepped forward and said something nobody expected. Evelyn Carter stood frozen in the muddy street as laughter echoed around her, her worn suitcase sinking into the wet ground. A cruel voice cut through the crowd. Boots scraped against the wooden walkways, and every eye turned toward the woman they had already judged. Then a tall rancher moved through the crowd. But why would a man who trusted no one choose to defend her? Stay with us for this unforgettable story. The stagecoach groaned its way down the uneven road toward Silver Creek, Colorado territory, its wooden wheels striking every rut left behind by wagons, cattle drives, and spring storms. Inside the crowded coach, Evelyn Carter sat with both hands wrapped around the handle of her worn leather suitcase, holding it close as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. The journey from Missouri had taken nearly 2 weeks, 2 weeks of dust settling on her dress, 2 weeks of sleeping in unfamiliar boarding houses, 2 weeks of watching strangers decide who she was before she ever spoke a word. The letter folded carefully inside her coat pocket had become softer at the edges from being touched so many times. Walter Carter, her half-brother, the only family she had left. His handwriting had been firm and confident. Come to Silver Creek. There is opportunity here. I will help you get settled. Evelyn had read those words on every difficult mile west. She had believed them because she needed to. At 32 years old, after losing her father and watching their family home disappear because of unpaid debts, she had nowhere else to go. She knew how to keep household accounts, how to sew a torn coat until the stitches nearly disappeared, how to cook enough food to feed a ranch crew after a long day in the saddle. She knew how to work. What she did not know was whether anyone would care. The stagecoach suddenly dropped into a deep rut. The wooden frame shook violently. Evelyn's shoulder struck the side of the coach, and her suitcase slid against the floorboards. A young woman sitting across from her quickly adjusted her bonnet and looked away. A businessman beside the window sighed loudly. You'd think they'd fix these roads someday, he muttered. Evelyn said nothing. She had learned that silence was sometimes safer than giving people another reason to notice her. The coach continued forward. Through the dusty glass window, she caught her first glimpse of Silver Creek. It was smaller than she imagined. A long dirt street stretched between wooden buildings. A blacksmith shop stood near the edge of town, smoke rising from its chimney. A general mercantile sat beside a small hotel with a faded sign swinging above the entrance. Horses were tied along hitching rails, and men in dusty hats moved between storefronts carrying supplies and talking over cups of coffee. It should have looked like a beginning. Instead, Evelyn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew what would happen. She had seen it before. The quick glance, the lowered voices, the judgment before the introduction. The stagecoach finally rolled into town and stopped near the mercantile. The driver climbed down and opened the door. Silver Creek, he called. One by one, passengers stepped out. Evelyn waited until the others were gone. Then she picked up her suitcase. The moment her boots touched the muddy ground, she felt it, the shift people noticed. A few men standing near the saloon stopped talking. A woman sweeping the wooden walkway outside a dress shop paused with her broom still in her hand. A child stared openly until his mother pulled him back. Evelyn lowered her eyes for only a moment. Then she straightened her shoulders. She had not traveled hundreds of miles to disappear. The driver pulled her suitcase from the top of the coach and dropped it beside her. Careful with that, Evelyn said. The driver glanced at the old leather case. It already looks like it survived more than most folks. He walked away before she could answer. Evelyn looked down the street. Somewhere in this town was Walter Carter. Somewhere was the brother who had promised she would have a place. She picked up her suitcase and started walking. The mercantile seemed like the best place to begin. Before she reached the door, a voice carried across the street. Well, that's something you don't see every day. Evelyn stopped. A few men near the hitching rail were watching her. One of them laughed, another nudged him with an elbow. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. People heard. They always did. Evelyn kept walking. Inside the mercantile, shelves were stacked with flour, canned goods, coffee tins, fabric rolls, and tools hanging from wooden hooks. The smell of leather and tobacco filled the room. A thin man behind the counter looked up. His eyes moved from her face to her suitcase, then back again. "Can I help you? I'm looking for Walter Carter," Evelyn said. "I'm his half-sister." The man's expression changed. Not surprise, something closer to discomfort. "You're Walter Carter's sister?" He glanced toward the window. Well, the single word carried more than it should have. Evelyn felt her fingers tighten around the suitcase handle. "Is something wrong?" The man looked away. "Walter lives on the north side of town, near the old mill road." "Thank you." She turned to leave. "Miss Carter." She looked back. The storekeeper hesitated. For a moment, Evelyn thought maybe he was going to offer kindness. Instead, he said quietly, "Silver Creek can be a difficult place for newcomers." Ev gave a small nod. "I've noticed." Outside, the sun had climbed higher. The mud on the road had begun drying around the edges, leaving cracks in the dirt. Evelyn found the address after asking twice. A neat white house stood near the edge of town, with a trimmed fence and freshly painted shutters. It looked nothing like the places where she had spent the last few months. For the first time since arriving, hope returned. She walked to the door, knocked. Once, then again. After a moment, the door opened. A man stood there. Walter Carter. Older than she remembered. His beard was neatly trimmed. His shirt was clean. His boots were polished. He looked like a man who had built a respectable life. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. "Walter," Evelyn said softly. His face changed, not into happiness, into worry. "Evelyn." She smiled faintly. "I was afraid my letter didn't reach you. It did." The answer came too quickly. Her smile faded slightly. "I wrote 3 weeks ago, I know." The silence between them felt strange. She looked past him. The house was warm, comfortable, a place where someone belonged. "I thought perhaps I could stay here until I found work," she said. "Just until I get settled." Walter stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Not all the way, just enough. A small movement, but Evelyn noticed. "You shouldn't have come here." The words landed harder than she expected. She stared at him. "What?" Walter looked down the street. People were passing, watching. His voice lowered. "Silver Creek is a small town, I know. People talk." Evelyn waited. She wanted him to explain. She wanted him to tell her she misunderstood. Instead, Walter sighed. "You don't understand what I've built here." Her eyes moved over his clean house, his well-kept yard. "You built a reputation." Yes, the honesty hurt. "I am your sister." Walter's jaw tightened. "You are my father's daughter." The correction was colder than she expected. Evelyn stood still. The wind moved dust across the road between them. "I came because you told me you would help. I wrote before I knew what it would look like." What would look like? Walter did not answer immediately. He looked at her dress, her suitcase, her worn boots, then away. This town notices things. Evelyn understood. Not the words, the meaning. Her throat tightened. "You're embarrassed by me." Walter said nothing, and that silence answered for him. Across the street, a rider sat on a dark horse near the edge of town, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. Thomas Hayes had seen the entire exchange. Most people in Silver Creek knew better than to stare at him. They called him quiet, cold, unapproachable. But Tom Hayes had noticed something the others had missed. The woman standing outside Walter Carter's house was not asking for pity. She was standing there trying not to break, and for reasons he did not understand yet. That bothered him. Evelyn picked up her suitcase again. "Thank you for your honesty, Walter." Her voice was quiet. Too quiet. She turned and walked back toward town. She did not cry. She did not argue. She simply walked. And somehow that made the rejection worse, because everyone watching expected her to fall apart. She refused to give them that. Near the Mercantile, Martha Collins stepped from her dress shop. She was a woman who knew everyone's business and considered that a talent. Her eyes moved over Evelyn. "Well," Martha said. The street slowed. People listened. "I suppose Walter wasn't expecting family quite like this." A few people laughed. Evelyn stopped. Martha walked closer. "You must be tired from traveling." Evelyn said nothing. Martha smiled. A polite smile, the kind that carried a sharp edge. "Silver Creek is a respectable town. People here value appearances." The crowd grew. Men near the saloon, women outside the stores, everyone watching. Evelyn held her suitcase tighter. "I'm only looking for work." Martha glanced at her dress. "Of course you are." The words sounded harmless. They were not. Someone laughed. Evelyn felt every eye on her. Then Martha looked toward the crowd. "I suppose we should all be welcoming." A pause. "But some people should understand that not every place is meant for everyone." The street went quiet. Evelyn looked at the faces around her, the same faces that had judged her before knowing her name. Then a voice came from behind this crowd. "That's enough." The laughter stopped. Everyone turned. Thomas Hayes stepped forward, the cowboy from the horse near Walter's house. He removed his gloves slowly. His expression was calm. Too calm. Martha's smile disappeared. "Tom Hayes." He looked at her. "Evelyn Carter came here looking for a place to stand, not a reason for everyone to knock her down." Nobody spoke. The wind moved through the street. A horse stamped its hoof against the dirt. Martha crossed her arms. "This is a private matter." Tom glanced at Evelyn's suitcase sitting in the mud. "No, it stopped being private when you made sure everyone heard." The crowd became silent. Evelyn looked at him. She did not know this man. She did not know why he cared. But for the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, someone looked at her and did not seem to be measuring what she lacked. Tom picked up her suitcase, not as a rescue, not as a favor, just because it was sitting in the mud. He handed it back to her. "Are you looking for work, Miss Carter?" Evelyn hesitated. "Yes." Tom nodded once. "Then maybe start with finding someone willing to ask what you can do before deciding what you are." The street remained quiet, and everyone in Silver Creek wondered the same thing. Why would Thomas Hayes, the man who trusted nobody, stand up for the woman nobody wanted? Evelyn Carter wondered too. She stood in the middle of the muddy street with her suitcase in her hand, watching Thomas Hayes walk back toward his horse, as if what he had done required no explanation, no grand speech, no waiting for applause, no interest in the whispers beginning around him. That almost confused her more than the cruelty. Most people who showed kindness wanted something in return. A favor. A thank you. A story they could tell later about how generous they had been. But Tom Hayes had simply seen something wrong and stopped it. Then he walked away. Evelyn looked down at her suitcase. The leather was cracked along the corners from the long trip west. One of the brass clasps had been repaired twice by her own hands. It carried nearly everything she owned. A few dresses, her father's old account book, some letters, a small sewing kit. Nothing that impressed anyone in Silver Creek. She took a slow breath and turned back toward the street. She still needed a place to stay, and she still needed to find Walter, or at least understand why the brother who had invited her west had suddenly decided she was a problem. The walk back to Walter's house felt longer than before. The afternoon sun had warmed the dirt road, and the mud that had stuck to her boots earlier had begun to harden around the edges. When she reached the white fence again, Walter was still outside. He looked surprised to see her return, not relieved. Surprised. "Evelyn." She stopped at the gate. "I wanted to ask you something." Walter glanced toward the house. His hand rested on the top rail of the fence. "What? Did you mean what you wrote?" His brow tightened. "What are you talking about?" "The letter." She pulled the folded paper from her coat pocket. The edges were worn. "I came here because you told me there was opportunity. You told me I would not be alone." Walter looked at the letter, but did not take it. For a moment, something almost like regret crossed his face. Then it disappeared. "I was trying to help." "You were?" "Yes," his answer came quickly. "I meant well." Evelyn looked at him quietly. "Then why does it feel like you are trying to hide me?" Walter looked away. The silence said enough. He walked closer, but kept his voice low. "Evelyn, you don't understand how things work here. I understand more than you think." "No, you don't." His expression hardened. "This town is built on reputation. People here know my name. They know my business. They know the families I work with. And having me here changes that?" Walter did not answer immediately. That pause hurt more than any insult. "You came here with nothing," he finally said. Evelyn stared at him. "I came here with skills. Skills don't change what people see." The words hung between them. For a moment, Evelyn felt like she was back home again, back at every dinner table where someone had spoken over her, back at every gathering where she had learned to make herself quieter, smaller, easier to ignore. She tightened her grip on the letter. "I am not asking you to introduce me to wealthy families. I am not asking you to give me money. Then what do you want?" The question sounded almost impatient. Evelyn blinked. "A brother." Walter looked uncomfortable, not angry, not cruel, just uncomfortable. And somehow that was worse. "I have responsibilities now," he said. She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she folded the letter carefully. "Of course you do," Walter sighed. "Evelyn, no." Her voice surprised both of them. She stepped back from the gate. "I understand. You don't have to make this dramatic." She looked at him. "I'm not." And she wasn't. That was the strange part. She had expected anger. She had expected tears. Instead, there was only a tired kind of understanding. Some doors did not need to be forced open. Some were closed because the person inside never intended to let you enter. Walter lowered his eyes. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Evelyn nodded. "So do I." She turned away. This time, Walter did not stop her. The boarding house was near the center of town, above a small bakery that smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon. The owner, Mrs. Abigail Turner, was a thin woman with gray hair pulled tightly into a bun. She looked Evelyn over when she entered. "Need a room? Yes, ma'am. How long?" Evelyn hesitated. "I'm not certain." Mrs. Turner studied her. "That usually means someone is either running from something or starting over." Evelyn managed a small smile. "Maybe both." The older woman looked at her for another second. Then she reached behind the counter and picked up a key. $3 a week. Room upstairs. Shared washroom. Breakfast costs extra. Evelyn opened her purse. The coins inside felt painfully few. She counted them carefully. $2.75, Mrs. Turner noticed. "You short?" "By 25 cents. The woman was quiet. Then she sighed. "Pay me next week." Evelyn looked up. "I will." "I didn't ask." A small kindness, almost hidden. Evelyn nodded. "Thank you." The room was small, a narrow bed, a wooden chair, a wash basin beside a cracked mirror, a small window overlooking the alley behind the building. It was not much, but it had a door that closed. And tonight, that was enough. Evelyn placed her suitcase beside the bed and sat down. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to stop moving. The room was quiet. Too quiet. She looked at the letter from Walter again. Then she folded it and placed it inside her suitcase, not thrown away, not destroyed, just put away. The next morning came cold. Silver Creek woke slowly beneath a pale sky. Evelyn dressed in her cleanest dress and walked downstairs. She had spent the night making a list. Work she could do, places that might need help, things she knew, cooking, sewing, bookkeeping, housekeeping, anything honest. The first place she tried was the bakery. The owner listened for less than a minute. "We already have help." The second was a small hotel. The manager glanced at her. "Need someone stronger for kitchen work." "I am strong." He gave a polite smile. "I'm sure you are." But he had already turned away. The third was a clothing shop. Martha Collins answered the door. Evelyn recognized her immediately, the woman from yesterday, the one who had turned her arrival into entertainment. Martha's expression changed the moment she saw her. "You again, I'm looking for work." Martha looked around the empty shop. "We don't have anything available. I can sew." "So can every woman in this town. I can keep records." Martha smiled slightly. "Perhaps you should understand something, Miss Carter." Evelyn waited. "This shop represents elegance." Her eyes moved over Evelyn's plain dress. "People come here because they want to feel better about themselves." The meaning was clear. Evelyn swallowed. "I see." Martha opened the door wider. "I'm sure you'll find something." Evelyn stepped back onto the street. She did not argue. She did not ask again. By noon, she had been turned away 5 times. By afternoon, 8. Each rejection was different. Were polite, some were not. But the result was always the same. No. As the sun began to lower behind the mountains, Evelyn walked back toward the boarding house. She passed the edge of town where a small ranch road stretched into open country. A large wooden gate stood at the entrance. Hayes Ranch. She recognized the name from the sign, the same man who had stepped forward yesterday. Thomas Hayes. She slowed for a moment. Through the fence, she could see cattle moving across the field. A man on horseback checked the herd. Even from a distance, she recognized him. Tom Hayes. He was not looking toward town. He was working. A dog ran beside his horse. A ranch hand repaired a section of fence nearby. It looked peaceful, but there was something lonely about it too. Evelyn continued walking. She told herself she had only stopped because she was tired. Not because she was curious. Not because the first person in Silver Creek who had shown her respect happened to be the one person everyone else seemed afraid of. That evening, she sat on the edge of her small bed and counted her remaining coins. Not enough for long. Not enough to wait around. She opened her father's old account book. The pages were filled with numbers and notes written in his careful handwriting. She traced one line with her finger. For years, people had told her what she was not good enough for. But numbers did not judge. Work did not judge. A ledger never cared what someone looked like. The next morning, she would try again. She would knock on more doors. She would ask for more chances. Because whatever Silver Creek thought of her, she had not crossed half the country to give up after 2 days. Outside her window, the town settled into darkness, and somewhere beyond the last row of buildings, Thomas Hayes sat alone inside his ranch house, staring at a cold cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. He had spent years avoiding other people's problems. Yet somehow the woman who arrived with one suitcase and nowhere to go had stayed on his mind. Not because she needed saving, because she had looked him straight in the eye after being humiliated and still refused to let anyone see her fall. And that was something Tom Hayes understood, because he had spent years doing the exact same thing. He had learned how to stand alone, how to keep conversations short, how to answer a question with a nod instead of a story. People in Silver Creek had plenty to say about Thomas Hayes, but very few actually knew him. They knew he owned one of the larger cattle ranches outside town. They knew he rarely came into Silver Creek unless he needed supplies. They knew he had a habit of riding the outer fence lines before sunrise and returning after dark. They knew his wife and young son had died years ago, and because people rarely understood pain they could not see, they filled the silence with their own explanations. Some called him cold. Some called him strange. Some said the mountains had changed him. Tom never corrected them. He had stopped caring what people believed until Evelyn Carter arrived. That morning, he found himself looking toward town more than once. He told himself it was because he needed supplies. The ranch needed flour, coffee, lamp oil, and a few new tools. That was all, nothing more. He rode into Silver Creek around mid-morning on a dark brown gelding, his coat dusty from the trail. Henry Dawson was already waiting near the mercantile, loading feed sacks onto a wagon. Henry had worked at Hayes Ranch for almost 10 years. He was older than Tom, quiet in the way of men who had spent most of their lives outside. His beard had gone more gray than brown, and his hands carried the marks of decades around horses and cattle. "You hear about the woman?" Henry asked. Tom looked over. "What woman?" Henry gave him a look. "The one you defended yesterday." Tom adjusted the reins. "Her name is Evelyn Carter." Henry nodded. "I know." A pause. "She's been looking for work." Tom said nothing. Henry continued stacking supplies. "Been to half the businesses in town from what I heard. And," Henry glanced at him, "and nobody wants to hire her." Tom looked toward the street. Near the boarding house, Evelyn was walking with a small notebook in her hand. She was not wandering. She was making a list, stopping at buildings, writing something down, moving to the next place. There was something different about the way she carried herself. She was tired. That much was obvious, but she was still moving forward. Most people who were treated badly eventually stopped trying. Evelyn Carter had not. "She's stubborn," Henry said. Tom almost smiled. "Seems that way." Henry leaned against the wagon. "Reminds me of someone." Tom looked at him. Henry shrugged, not saying who. Tom ignored the comment, but he watched Evelyn cross the street toward the old feed store. The owner listened for less than a minute before shaking his head. Another door closed. Evelyn thanked him anyway. Then she walked away. No anger, no argument, just another rejection added to a growing list. Tom looked away. "Need to finish loading." Henry watched him for a moment. "Sure." But there was a quiet understanding between them. Henry had noticed. Tom had noticed. Neither man said it. That afternoon, Evelyn found herself outside a small farm on the edge of town. An elderly man named George Miller was struggling beside a broken wagon wheel. The wooden spoke had cracked, leaving the wagon tilted awkwardly in the dirt. Evelyn stopped. "Need some help?" The old man looked up. "I doubt it." He glanced at her, not cruelly, just uncertain. "I can fix it. You know wagons?" "My father repaired everything because he couldn't afford not to." George studied her, then handed her the broken piece. "Well, let's see what you can do." For the next hour, Evelyn worked beside him. She examined the damaged wood, found the weak point, and helped reinforce the spoke with a metal brace from his shed. Her dress gathered dust. Her hands became dirty, but she kept working. When the wagon finally stood level again, George climbed onto the seat and tested it. A slow smile appeared. "Well, I'll be." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron. "Does it hold?" "It does." He looked at her differently now. Not like a stranger, like someone who had proven herself. "You looking for work?" "Yes, sir." "Wish I could help you. Already have my boy handling the farm." Evelyn nodded. "I understand." George reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins. She immediately shook her head. "No, sir. It's not charity. I didn't fix your wagon for money." George looked at her, then slowly put the coins away. Fair enough, he smiled. But you should know something. What? You don't have to convince everyone. Evelyn looked surprised. George nodded toward town. Some folks make up their minds before they hear a word you say. She lowered her eyes. I know, the old farmer studied her for a moment. Maybe that's why you shouldn't waste your words on them. It was a simple thing, but Evelyn carried it with her. Later that evening, Henry told Tom about the wagon. She fixed George Miller's wagon. Tom looked up from the ledger on his desk. She did? Without asking for anything. Henry leaned back in his chair. She just saw something broken and fixed it. Tom looked down at the numbers in front of him. The ranch accounts had become harder to manage since he stopped keeping up with household matters. The books were accurate, but messy. Bills were scattered. Receipts were stuffed into drawers. Supply lists were incomplete. His wife had once handled those things. After she died, he had let them become another reminder of what he had lost. I could use help with the ranch records, Tom said quietly. Henry raised an eyebrow. With Evelyn? Tom did not answer immediately. She knows bookkeeping. You know that how? She mentioned it yesterday. Henry smiled slightly. So you were listening. Tom gave him a look. Henry lifted both hands, just asking. The next morning, Tom rode into town. He found Evelyn sitting at a small table outside the boarding house, writing in her notebook. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside her. She looked up when his shadow crossed the page. Mr. Hayes, Miss Carter. There was a pause. Tom noticed the notebook, a list of names, businesses, jobs, all crossed out. You've been busy. She closed the notebook. I'm trying. I can see that. She waited. Tom removed his hat. I have an offer. Evelyn looked cautious. What kind? Work. Her expression changed slightly. What kind of work? My ranch needs someone to manage household records, supplies, accounts, some organizing. She studied him. And why are you offering it to me? Because you can do it. The answer came so simply that she almost missed it. Almost. Most people would have said something about needing help or feeling sorry for her. Tom said neither. Evelyn looked away. I appreciate the offer, but I don't want pity. Tom's expression remained calm. It isn't pity. People in this town already think I'm a problem. People in this town are often wrong. The answer surprised her. She looked back at him. Tom continued. I'm offering a job. You work. I pay you. That's simple. That's simple. Evelyn folded her hands. What would the pay be? Tom answered immediately. $20 a month. Her eyes widened slightly. That's fair? It is. She looked toward the street. The town was watching again. They always were. Then she looked back at him. I have conditions. Tom almost smiled. Go ahead. I want written records of my wages. Fine. I want clear duties. Fine. And I want you to understand something. What? I don't need someone to rescue me. Tom held her gaze. I know. The answer was quiet. Honest. For some reason, that mattered. Evelyn looked down at the notebook in front of her. Then she closed it. When do I start? Tom nodded. Tomorrow morning, she stood. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. He put his hat back on. Tom, she paused. What? Call me Tom. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Evelyn smiled, small, almost hidden, but real. Tomorrow morning then, Tom. He walked away toward his horse, and from the window of the dress shop, Martha Collins watched the entire exchange. Beside her stood Samuel Reed, a wealthy rancher whose polished boots and expensive coat made him look like a man who had never struggled a day in his life. He watched Tom right away, then he looked at Evelyn. That woman is becoming a problem. Martha folded her arms. She's only been here a few days. Samuel's eyes narrowed. That's exactly why it matters. He looked toward Hayes Ranch in the distance. People are starting to forget what Tom Hayes is. Martha glanced at him. And what is that? Samuel smiled faintly. A man who owns something worth taking. The wind moved across the open fields, and far beyond town, Evelyn Carter prepared for her first day at Hayes Ranch. She did not know yet that the job would change more than her circumstances. It would bring her closer to the one man in Silver Creek who understood what it felt like to be judged before being known. And it would place her directly in the path of people who had no intention of letting that happen. The road to Hayes Ranch stretched north beyond Silver Creek, winding between open fields and low hills covered with dry grass. Evelyn Carter sat beside the wagon trail with her small suitcase resting beside her, waiting for the ranch wagon Tom had promised to send. She had spent the previous evening preparing, not packing. There was not much to pack. Instead, she had gone through her few belongings carefully, making sure everything was clean and organized. Her father's account book, her sewing kit, 2 dresses, a small tin box with letters she could not bring herself to throw away. She had learned long ago that when you owned little, you took care of what you had. The ranch wagon arrived just after sunrise. Henry Dawson sat on the driver's seat, holding the reins with one hand and a coffee mug with the other. Miss Carter. Good morning, Mr. Dawson. He nodded toward her suitcase. That all you're bringing? Evelyn glanced down. Yes. Henry looked like he wanted to say something but decided against it. Instead, he climbed down and lifted the suitcase into the back of the wagon. It'll fit. The ride took nearly 40 minutes. Silver Creek disappeared behind them. The sounds of the town faded. No voices, no whispers, no strangers watching from storefronts. Only the sound of wagon wheels rolling over dirt and the occasional call of cattle in the distance. Evelyn looked out across the land. The ranch was larger than she expected. A wooden fence stretched across the valley. Several barns stood near the main house. Cattle moved slowly through the pasture while 2 ranch hands worked near the corral. It was a working place, not a showpiece. Everything had a purpose. When they reached the house, Tom was standing near the front steps. He was holding a stack of papers, not dressed differently, not trying to impress her. Just another morning at the ranch. Morning, he said. Morning. A brief silence followed. Evelyn noticed it immediately. The ranch was quiet, but it was not the uncomfortable silence she had known in Walter's house. It felt different, like the land itself was taking a breath. Tom picked up her suitcase. Evelyn reached for it. I can carry it, I know. He handed it to her. Then he pointed towards the house. Your room is upstairs, second door on the left. She looked surprised. My room? Tom nodded. You're working here. You'll have your own space. Something about the simple statement caught her attention. No assumptions, no hesitation, just respect. Inside, the house was clean but strangely empty. The furniture was well made, the floors were polished, but there were signs of a place that had stopped changing years ago. A chair near the fireplace had a blanket folded neatly over the back. A framed photograph sat on a shelf. Evelyn noticed Tom glance at it once before looking away. She did not ask. Not yet. Some questions needed the right moment. Tom showed her the kitchen, the pantry, the office, the dining room. This is where the ranch records are kept. He opened the door. Inside was a desk covered with papers, receipts, invoices, notes. Evelyn stepped closer. She immediately saw the problem. The records were not wrong. They were simply neglected. Bills were mixed together. Supply lists were unfinished. Several receipts from the mercantile were tucked beneath a ledger. She looked at Tom. When was the last time these were organized? He looked at the desk. Some time ago. How long? A pause. Long enough. Evelyn nodded slowly. She understood more than he said. I can start here. Tom looked at her. You don't have to fix everything in one day, I know. She picked up a stack of papers. But if I leave it like this, it will only become worse. For a moment, Tom simply watched her. Then he nodded. All right, that was the beginning. Not with a grand moment, not with promises, just a woman sitting at a desk, and a man allowing someone into a part of his life he had kept closed for years. The first week passed quietly. Evelyn worked. She organized the accounts. She labeled receipts. She created a simple system for tracking supplies. Every evening, she wrote down what had been spent and what would be needed the following week. Tom noticed. He noticed everything. The ranch bills were easier to understand. The kitchen shelves were no longer missing basic items. The workers started receiving warmer meals at the end of long days. Small things. Things that had somehow been missing. One afternoon, Henry walked into the office holding a stack of papers. Where does this go? Evelyn looked up. Mercantile receipt? Yes. Second drawer. Left side. Henry opened the drawer. There it was. He smiled. Well, I'll be. Evelyn laughed softly. What? Nothing. Henry looked around the office. Just strange seeing this place look like someone actually lives here. The words made her pause. She looked around. He was right. The office no longer felt abandoned. There were fresh flowers in a small jar near the window. The desk was clear. The fireplace had been cleaned. Life had quietly returned. Tom noticed it too. He just never said much, but Evelyn began seeing small changes. A broken hinge on the kitchen cabinet was repaired. A loose step on the porch was replaced. One morning, she found a small bundle of firewood stacked neatly beside her room. She asked Henry about it. Wasn't me, Tom? Henry looked away. Could be. Evelyn smiled slightly. That evening, she found Tom near the barn checking a horse's saddle. Thank you. He looked up. For what? The firewood. Tom shrugged. Winter comes fast out here. That wasn't really an answer. A small pause. Then he looked back at the saddle. You were working late. So you shouldn't have to carry wood in the dark. Simple, practical. But Evelyn heard what he did not say. I noticed. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, Tom, he nodded, and that was enough. But not everyone was happy about the changes at Hayes Ranch. In Silver Creek, people noticed when things changed, especially when those changes involved someone they had already decided did not belong. Martha Collins heard about Evelyn organizing the ranch accounts. Samuel Reed heard about it too. They met outside the mercantile one afternoon. She's settling in quickly, Martha said. Samuel adjusted his gloves. That's what worries me. She's only working, for now. Martha looked toward the road leading to Hayes Ranch. Tom Hayes has always been difficult to influence. Samuel smiled faintly. Everyone has a weakness, and hers? Samuel watched the distant hills. Everyone wants to belong somewhere. Martha understood. She looked back toward town. The same woman they had laughed at was beginning to earn respect, and that made some people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Evelyn continued discovering the man behind the rumors. One evening, she found Tom leaving a sack of flour and canned goods on the porch of an elderly neighbor's home. He noticed her watching. For a second, neither spoke. Then Tom said, "He lost his crop this season." Evelyn looked at the supplies. "You help him often?" Tom shrugged. "When I can. But nobody in town talks about that." His expression changed slightly. People usually talk about what they understand, and they don't understand you. Tom looked toward the darkening sky. Probably not. Evelyn wanted to say something that might reach him, but she knew better. Some walls were not broken down by force. They were opened slowly. That night, as Evelyn sat in her room repairing a torn sleeve, she heard the sound of a piano downstairs. She stopped. Tom had never mentioned owning one. The music was quiet, not practiced, not performed. Just a few slow notes filling the empty house. Evelyn walked halfway down the stairs, then stopped. Tom sat alone near the fireplace, his back toward her. For a moment, she saw something she had not seen before. Not the distant ranch owner, not the man everyone feared, just a person carrying memories. She stepped back quietly. She did not want him to know she had heard. The next morning, Tom found a repaired button on his work coat hanging near the door. He looked at it, then toward the office. Evelyn was already working. Neither mentioned it, but something small had changed. The ranch was no longer just a place where two people worked. It was becoming something else. A place where two wounded people slowly learned they did not have to stand alone. Neither Evelyn Carter nor Thomas Hayes would have admitted it, not yet. They were still two people who had spent years protecting the parts of themselves that hurt the most. But something had changed at Hayes Ranch. The house no longer felt empty. The mornings began with the smell of coffee instead of silence. The kitchen table held 2 plates instead of 1. The office desk stayed organized, the ranch records were up to date, and every evening, when the sun dropped behind the Colorado mountains, Evelyn would sit near the porch with her sewing while Tom checked the day's notes by the light of an oil lamp. They did not talk much, they did not need to. Some people filled quiet moments because they were afraid of them. Tom and Evelyn were learning that silence could also mean comfort. By late September, the weather began changing. The mornings became colder. A thin layer of frost appeared on the grass near the fences. The ranch hands started wearing heavier coats before sunrise. Evelyn noticed Tom watching the mountains more often. Not casually, carefully, like he was listening for something. One morning, she found him studying the sky while holding a cup of coffee. "Storm coming?" Tom glanced toward the clouds gathering over the peaks. Maybe. Maybe. He looked at her. Mountain weather changes its mind. Evelyn smiled slightly. "Sounds complicated." "It is." She looked at the dark clouds. "Should we prepare?" Tom nodded. Already started, and he had. Extra feed was moved closer to the barn. Tools were stored inside. The gates were checked twice. Evelyn noticed those things. Tom never made announcements. He simply handled problems before they arrived. That afternoon, Samuel Reed stopped by the ranch. He arrived wearing a fine coat that looked more suited for a town meeting than a muddy road. Tom met him near the fence. Evelyn was inside the house, organizing receipts from the mercantile. She could hear voices through the open window. "Storm's coming," Samuel said. Tom leaned against the fence. "I know, bad one, from what I hear. Probably." Samuel looked across the ranch. "You have a lot of land here, Tom." Tom's expression did not change. "I know what I own," Samuel smiled. "I'm just saying, a man running a place this size alone has a lot to think about." Tom looked toward the house. For the briefest moment, his eyes moved toward the window where Evelyn worked. Samuel noticed. "You've changed things around here." Tom said nothing. Samuel continued. "Didn't think you were the kind of man who wanted company." "None of your concern." Samuel laughed quietly. "Still the same." He adjusted his gloves. "Think about my offer. I already did." And, "No." The answer came quickly. Samuel's smile faded. "Careful, Tom." "About what?" "Sometimes holding on to the past keeps a man from seeing what he should let go." Tom looked at him. The warmth disappeared from his expression. "You should leave before the weather gets worse." Samuel held his gaze for a moment, then he turned his horse around. But before leaving, he looked back. This town changes its mind quickly. Tom watched him right away. He knew exactly what Samuel meant. The storm was not the only thing approaching. That evening, the first rain began. By nightfall, it was falling hard. The wind pushed against the windows. The old wooden house creaked beneath the force of the storm. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, holding down a stack of papers as the wind rattled the shutters. Tom stood near the window. The cattle. She looked up. "What?" Some of the lower pasture fencing might not hold. Evelyn saw the concern in his face. You're going out there. I need to check. The storm is getting worse. Tom reached for his coat. I'll be careful, she stood. Then I'm coming. He looked at her. No, I can help. It's dangerous. So is letting you go alone. The words surprised both of them. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Tom had heard people argue with him before. He was not used to someone standing beside him, not behind him, not waiting for him to solve everything. Beside him. Finally, he picked up a second coat. Stay close. Outside, the world had become a wall of rain and wind. The lantern barely cut through the darkness. The ground had turned soft beneath their boots. They reached the lower pasture and found exactly what Tom feared. Part of the fence had broken. Several cattle had moved toward the edge of the field. Tom immediately started working. Evelyn followed without hesitation. She held the lantern, moved tools, helped guide the animals back. The rain soaked through her coat within minutes. Her hands shook from the cold, but she kept moving. At one point, a young calf became separated from the herd. Tom moved toward it. Evelyn grabbed the lantern tighter and followed. Evelyn, I'm here. He looked back. For a second, he wanted to tell her to return, but he stopped himself because he knew what she would say. She was not helpless. She had proven that. Together, they brought the calf back. Together, they repaired enough of the fence to keep the herd secure until morning. The time they returned to the house, both were exhausted. Their clothes were soaked, their boots covered in mud. Evelyn laughed softly as she removed her coat. What? Tom asked. She looked at him. I was thinking my first month at Hayes Ranch has been less peaceful than expected. For a moment, Tom stared. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled, not a polite smile, not a small acknowledgement. A real smile. It disappeared quickly, but Evelyn saw it, and somehow she felt like she had witnessed something rare. The next morning, the storm finally passed. The mountains stood covered in mist. The ranch had survived. The cattle were safe. The damage was manageable. But something between them had changed. Later that afternoon, while they repaired a section of the barn roof, Evelyn noticed Tom had gone quiet. Quieter than usual, Tom? He looked down. What? You've been somewhere else all day. He continued working for another moment. Then he set the hammer down. My wife died during a storm. Evelyn froze. She had never heard him speak about her. Not once. Tom stared across the pasture. Her name was Anna. His voice was low. She was kind, smarter than me, always telling me I worried too much. A faint smile appeared. She was usually right. Evelyn said nothing. She knew better than to interrupt. We had a son. The smile faded. Jacob, the wind moved through the grass. He was supposed to be born in spring. Tom looked down at his hands. Things went wrong. He swallowed. The doctor did everything he could. A long silence followed. Neither of them survived. Evelyn lowered her eyes. The pain in his voice was not fresh. It was older than that. Something carried for years. I'm sorry. Tom nodded. I spent a long time thinking if I had loved them less, losing them would have hurt less. Evelyn looked at him. That doesn't work. No. He looked toward the mountains. It doesn't. For a while they stood there without speaking. Then Evelyn quietly said, I spent years thinking if I changed enough, people would stop judging me. Tom looked at her. She continued, I thought maybe if I was quieter, if I took up less space, if I made everyone comfortable, they would finally see me differently. She gave a small, sad smile. But some people decide who you are before you ever get the chance to show them. Tom watched her carefully. That sounds familiar. She looked at him, and for the first time, they both understood something. They had different wounds, different stories. but they had carried the same weight, the belief that maybe they were the problem. That night, Evelyn made dinner. Nothing special, just stew, bread, and coffee. But when Tom sat at the table, he looked around the room. The fire was burning. The house felt warm. Someone had left a clean towel beside the sink. A fresh loaf of bread sat on the counter. Small things, ordinary things. Things he had forgotten mattered. Evelyn, she looked up. Yes, thank you. She smiled faintly. For dinner? He shook his head. No, he did not explain. He did not need to. She understood. Outside, the storm clouds finally disappeared from the mountains, and inside the Hayes ranch house, two people who had spent years surviving alone began slowly to understand what it meant to be seen. The days after the storm settled into a new rhythm. The ranch still demanded work, cattle still needed feeding, fences still needed repairing, accounts still needed recording. But something had changed. Evelyn no longer felt like a temporary guest waiting for someone to decide whether she belonged. She had a place at the kitchen table, a drawer in the office, a set of keys for the supply room. Small things, things most people would never notice. But after spending years feeling like she was always standing outside someone else's life, small things mattered. Tom noticed the change too. He noticed when Evelyn hummed quietly while working through the ranch records. He noticed when she left extra coffee warming on the stove, because she knew he often returned from the fields cold and tired. He noticed when she laughed with Henry near the barn, not loudly, not often, but enough. The ranch felt different, and people in Silver Creek noticed. They always noticed. At first, it was small, a few comments outside the mercantile, a few longer looks when Evelyn came into town for supplies. Then the whispers started. She's been at Hayes Ranch for weeks now. I heard she's running his household. Funny how quickly she found a place after everyone else turned her away. Evelyn heard some of it. She pretended she did not. Tom heard all of it. He pretended he did not. But Henry Dawson knew better. One morning, while they loaded cattle feed into the wagon, Henry shook his head. People talk too much. Tom tightened the rope around a sack. They always have. Doesn't bother you? Tom looked toward town. No, Henry studied him. Used to. Tom did not answer, because Henry was right. Years ago, Tom would have ignored everything, everyone. But now there was someone else being judged because she stood beside him. And that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The trouble reached its peak during the annual cattle auction celebration. Every fall, ranchers from across the territory gathered in Silver Creek. There were wagons lining the streets, merchants selling goods, families sharing meals, and ranch owners discussing prices over cups of coffee outside the saloon. For one day, the whole town felt alive. Evelyn had no desire to attend. She told Tom she could stay at the ranch and finish the bookkeeping. He looked up from tightening the buckle on his saddle. You're coming. She glanced at him. I don't want to make things harder for you. Tom stopped. Then he said quietly, You being there doesn't make things harder. Evelyn looked at him. He held her gaze for a moment, then returned to the saddle. It was a simple sentence, but she understood what he meant. So she came. She wore her nicest dress, not because she wanted approval, because she had spent too many years believing she did not deserve to look her best. The dress was dark blue, simple, well-made. She had repaired the sleeves herself. When she walked beside Tom into town, conversations slowed. People looked. Some smiled politely. Others did not bother hiding their opinions, Tom noticed. His hand tightened slightly around his hat, but Evelyn kept walking. Near the center of town, Martha Collins stood outside her dress shop, surrounded by several women. She looked Evelyn up and down. Well, the word carried across the street. Evelyn stopped. Tom looked at Martha, but Martha ignored him. I suppose congratulations are in order. Evelyn remained quiet. For what? Martha smiled. for becoming exactly what everyone expected. A few people nearby turned. Evelyn felt the attention gather. "Martha," Tom said again, but she continued. "You came here with nothing, no family, no reputation, no connections." Her eyes moved toward Tom. "And somehow you ended up at Hayes Ranch." The meaning was obvious. Evelyn felt heat rise in her face. Not shame, anger, a quiet anger she had carried for years. Martha stepped closer. "People around here are beginning to wonder." "Wonder what?" Evelyn's voice was calm. Martha smiled. "Whether you earned your place." The street became silent. For a moment, Evelyn thought about all the times she had heard similar words. Too large, too plain, too poor, too much. Always something, always a reason someone believed she did not belong. She opened her mouth, but Tom spoke first. "You should stop," Martha turned. "You're defending her again?" Tom stepped forward, not angry, not loud, just certain. "Yes," Martha crossed her arms. "You barely knew this woman a few months ago." Tom looked at Evelyn, then back at Martha. "You're right." The crowd became still. "I didn't know her." He paused, but I watched. Martha's expression changed slightly. Tom continued. "I watched her wake before everyone else and work until the lights went out. No one spoke. I watched her organize years of neglected ranch records in days. His voice remained steady. I watched her fix problems without asking who would notice." Evelyn looked at him. Tom looked toward the crowd. "You spent 5 minutes looking at her and decided what she was worth." A pause. "I spent months watching what she did." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Even Martha seemed caught off guard. Tom continued. "And what I saw was someone honest, someone hardworking, someone stronger than most people in this town." The street remained silent. Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest, not because he defended her, because he knew her. He had seen the things nobody bothered to see. Martha's expression hardened. "You think you know her?" Tom looked at her. "I know enough." Samuel Reed stood nearby watching the entire exchange. Unlike Martha, he said nothing. He simply observed. And that made Evelyn uneasy, because Samuel Reed was not a person who argued when he could wait. Later that afternoon, after the crowd had scattered, Evelyn and Tom stood near the edge of town. "You didn't have to do that." Tom looked at her. "Yes, I did." She shook her head. "You made yourself a target. So did you." She looked away. "I'm used to it." Tom was quiet. Then he said, "You shouldn't have to be." The words stayed with her. On the ride back to the ranch, neither spoke much, but the silence felt different. Not empty, not uncomfortable, just full of things neither knew how to say. When they reached the ranch, Henry was waiting near the barn. He looked serious. "Tom." Tom stopped. "What happened?" Henry glanced toward the road leading back to town. Samuel Reed was asking questions. What kind of questions? About the ranch. Tom's expression changed. "What about it?" Henry lowered his voice. "Whether you're still capable of running it." Evelyn looked between them. "What does that mean?" Henry hesitated. Then he said, "It means some people are starting to think you've become distracted." Tom looked toward the mountains, the same mountains that had taken so much from him, the same land he had spent years protecting. And now someone was trying to use Evelyn against him. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the office looking through the ranch records. She found something she had not noticed before, a note from the previous month, a missing supply shipment, a payment recorded but never received. She frowned. Something was wrong. Someone had been making mistakes, or creating them. She looked toward the window. The ranch was quiet, but for the first time since arriving at Hayes Ranch, Evelyn felt the peace around them beginning to crack. The town had not accepted her, and now it seemed they were ready to prove she had no place there. But they had made one mistake. They thought Evelyn Carter was still the woman who arrived in Silver Creek standing alone in the mud. They had not yet learned what happened when someone who had already lost everything decided she had nothing left to fear. For the next several days, Silver Creek felt colder. Not because of the weather. The autumn sun still warmed the wooden porches in the afternoon. The mountains still stood blue against the horizon. The creek still moved quietly behind the old mill outside town. But something had shifted. People who once nodded at Evelyn now looked away. The woman who ran the bakery counter stopped saving her a seat during morning coffee. The store clerk who had once answered her questions politely suddenly became too busy whenever she entered. Even small things became difficult. A simple trip into town for flour, lamp oil, and sewing thread became something Evelyn had to prepare herself for. She would stand outside the mercantile for a moment, holding her basket, listening to the sounds inside. Boots on wooden floors, voices behind the counter, the bell above the door. Then she would take a breath and walk in. She refused to let other people decide where she could stand. But Tom noticed. He noticed every time she returned from town carrying a little more silence than before. One evening, he found her sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of receipts spread in front of her. The oil lamp beside her flickered softly. "You were gone longer than usual." Evelyn looked up. Had to visit 3 different places to find supplies. Tom leaned against the doorway. "Why?" She hesitated. Then she placed a receipt on the table. The mercantile said they were out of flour. Tom picked up the paper. "Henry bought 2 sacks there this morning." Evelyn looked down. "I know." The room went quiet. Tom folded the receipt carefully. "I'll speak with them." "No." Her answer came quickly. Tom looked at her. Evelyn lowered her voice. "I appreciate what you did in town." A pause. "But I don't want every problem I have to become another fight you have to win." Tom studied her face. "You think that's what I'm doing?" "I think you're trying to protect me." "Yes." She looked away. "And what happens when protecting me costs you everything?" Tom did not answer immediately. That was what worried her, because she knew Tom Hayes. He was the kind of man who would carry a heavy load without telling anyone his back hurt. The kind of man who would give away his last dollar and call it nothing. She had seen it. She had seen him leave supplies on the porch of a struggling family before sunrise, so they would never know who helped them. She had seen him repair a widow's fence without accepting payment. Tom was generous, but he was also alone, and Evelyn feared he would lose the little peace he had built because of her. The following morning, Samuel Reed arrived at Hayes Ranch. He rode a fine brown horse with a polished saddle and wore a dark coat that looked more suited for a city office than a ranch. Tom met him near the barn. Evelyn watched from the porch. Samuel smiled. Tom. Tom did not smile back. Samuel. The 2 men stood facing each other. They had known one another for years. Everyone in Colorado Territory knew Samuel Reed. He was successful, wealthy, charming when people were watching. But Tom had always noticed what happened when nobody was looking. "I heard things have been difficult lately." Tom crossed his arms. "Have they?" Samuel glanced toward the house, toward Evelyn. "Town gossip can be cruel." Tom's expression remained still. "You came all the way out here to discuss gossip?" Samuel laughed softly. "No." He adjusted his gloves. "I came to offer advice. I didn't ask for any." Samuel ignored the comment. "Your ranch has value, Tom." The wind moved through the dry grass around them. "You have good land, good cattle. But every successful man eventually learns something." Tom waited. "Reputation matters." Samuel looked towards the house again. "People are beginning to question your judgment." For a moment, Tom said nothing. Then he stepped closer. My judgment built this ranch, Samuel smiled. Maybe, a pause. But a man can lose everything when he stops thinking clearly. Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. She knew exactly what Samuel was doing. He was not accusing Tom directly. He was planting doubt, trying to make Tom believe Evelyn was the reason people questioned him. Tom saw through it. You're wasting your time. Samuel's smile faded slightly. Think about it. He turned his horse. Not everyone who walks into your life comes to help you. Then he rode away. That evening, Evelyn found Tom sitting alone outside the barn. The sunset painted the fields orange. For a while, she simply stood there. Then she walked over. Samuel came here because of me. Tom looked up. No, yes, her voice was quiet. Before I arrived, nobody questioned your decisions. Tom looked toward the mountains. That's not true. She waited. He continued. People have questioned me for years. Evelyn sat beside him. Not like this. Tom rubbed his hand across his jaw. For once, he looked tired. Not from work, from carrying something he had never put down. I don't want you to leave because of them. Evelyn looked at him. I didn't say I was leaving, but you're thinking about it. She did not answer, and that was answer enough. The next morning, Tom found her packing. Not much, just a few dresses, her sewing kit, the old suitcase she had arrived with. He stood in the doorway. Evelyn. She froze. Slowly, she turned. I wasn't going to disappear. Looked at the suitcase. Looks like you were. She lowered her eyes. I thought about going back east. Why? She swallowed. Because I know what it feels like to be unwanted. Tom stepped into the room. And you think you're unwanted here? No. She looked at him. That's the problem. Tom said nothing. Evelyn continued. You have a good life here, a ranch, a name people respect, friends who have known you for years. She touched the suitcase handle. And now people look at you differently because I'm here. Tom's expression changed. Not anger, something deeper. You think I stood up for you because I felt sorry for you? Evelyn looked away. No, then why? She had no answer. Tom moved closer. Evelyn, she looked at him. I stood there because it was wrong. Silence. I stood there because I watched people judge you without knowing you. His voice softened. And because I know what that feels like. The room became still. Evelyn noticed something she had never noticed before. Tom was not afraid of losing the town's approval. He had lost it years ago. What he feared was losing the one person who had started bringing warmth back into a life he had abandoned. I don't want to be another burden, she whispered. Tom shook his head. You're not. A long pause. Then he said, You never were. Outside, the wind moved through the trees beside the house. The suitcase remained on the bed, unpacked, for now. But neither of them knew that the storm around Hayes Ranch was only beginning. Because while Evelyn and Tom were fighting to understand what they meant to each other, Samuel Reed was already making his next move. And this time, he was not coming after Tom's reputation. He was coming after the ranch itself. For the next few weeks, Samuel Reed moved carefully. He did not make threats. He did not raise his voice. That was not his way. Samuel understood something about people. A loud man could be ignored. A polite man with a smile and a handful of papers could do much more damage. Around Silver Creek, rumors continued to drift from porch to porch. Some said Tom Hayes had changed. Some said he was making poor decisions. Some said Evelyn Carter had arrived with nothing and somehow managed to take control of the most respected ranch in the valley. None of it was true, but truth had never been as quick as gossip. At Hayes Ranch, life continued. The cattle still needed tending. The fences still needed repairs. The morning fires still needed lighting before the cold mountain air settled over the fields. Evelyn kept working. She balanced the ranch accounts at the kitchen table every evening, carefully writing numbers into the ledger with a small ink pen. She repaired Tom's old work shirts, she organized supply lists, she even convinced Henry Dawson that the ranch could save money by keeping better records of feed and equipment. Henry looked at the new ledger one morning and shook his head. Never thought I'd see the day a woman could make a cowboy afraid of his own paperwork. Evelyn smiled. Paper doesn't bite, Mr. Dawson. Henry looked at the thick stack of receipts. Depends who's holding the pen. It was the first time in days that she laughed. Tom heard it from the barn. He stopped for a moment. Just listened. The sound was small, but it was something he had not heard enough of in his home for many years. That evening, Tom brought 2 cups of coffee to the porch. He handed one to Evelyn. Henry thinks you're dangerous, she raised an eyebrow. Because of my bookkeeping, because you made him admit he was wrong. Evelyn looked toward the fields. That must have been difficult for him. Tom almost smiled, very. For a while they sat without speaking. The mountains turned dark in the distance. A few stars appeared above the ranch. Then Evelyn noticed something. Tom was looking at her, not the way people in town looked at her, not measuring, not judging, just looking. She lowered her eyes to her coffee cup. What? Tom looked away. Nothing. But she knew there was something. Neither of them said it. Not yet. Because some things felt too important to rush. Then, 3 days later, a stranger arrived in Silver Creek. He came by stagecoach. A man in a dark wool coat carrying a leather briefcase. His name was Charles Bennett, and he was looking for Evelyn Carter. The news traveled quickly. By noon, half the town knew. By afternoon, everyone knew. Evelyn was standing outside the ranch house when Charles arrived. She recognized the seal on the papers before he even spoke. Miss Carter, yes? The man removed his hat. My name is Charles Bennett. I'm an attorney from Missouri. Evelyn's expression changed. Missouri, the word alone brought back memories. A small farmhouse, her father's voice, her mother's sewing basket. The years before, people started telling her she was too much, too quiet, too different. Charles opened his briefcase. I've been searching for you for several months. Evelyn looked confused. Why? The lawyer glanced toward Tom, then back to her. Because your father left instructions that these documents were to be delivered to you personally. The air seemed to stop. Tom stepped closer. What documents? Charles carefully removed a sealed envelope. Ownership papers. Evelyn stared at it. I don't understand. You may want to sit down, Miss Carter. They gathered inside the ranch house, the same kitchen where Evelyn had spent countless evenings writing accounts, the same table where she had once wondered if she had any place left in the world. Charles placed the papers down. Your father owned more than the home you remember. Evelyn listened quietly. He invested in a successful supply business outside St. Louis. After his passing, the ownership was supposed to be divided according to his will. She looked at him. Divided? Charles nodded. Between you and your brother, Walter. The room became silent. Walter. Even hearing his name felt heavy. My brother told me there was nothing left. Charles looked down. That was not accurate. Tom's jaw tightened. How much did he take? The lawyer paused. I cannot make accusations without further review. Then he looked at Evelyn. But the documents show that your father intended you to receive a significant portion of the business. Evelyn touched the edge of the paper. Her fingers trembled slightly, not because of money, because of what it meant. All those years, all those moments when she believed she had been left behind. Her father had not forgotten her. Someone had hidden the truth. The next morning, Silver Creek changed. People who had ignored Evelyn suddenly remembered how to smile. The same merchant who claimed he had no flour for her now offered to set aside supplies. Martha Collins sent word that Evelyn was welcome at her dress shop any time. Evelyn noticed. She noticed every single change, and that hurt more than the cruelty, because now she knew it had never been about her. It had never been about her kindness, her work, her character. It had been about what people thought she could offer them. That afternoon, Clara Whitfield visited the ranch. The young widow stood on the porch holding a basket of fresh bread. Evelyn opened the door. Clara looked uncomfortable. "I brought this." Evelyn accepted the basket. "Thank you." Clara looked down. "I owe you an apology." Evelyn said nothing. Clara continued. "I laughed when everyone else laughed." Her voice became quieter. "I didn't know you," a pause. "And I decided I did." Evelyn looked at her. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Evelyn stepped aside. "Would you like some coffee?" Clara looked surprised, then nodded. Inside the house, something small began to change. Not the whole town, not yet, but something. That evening, Tom found Evelyn sitting alone on the porch. The lawyer's papers were beside her. "You could go back," she looked at him. "To Missouri." Tom sat beside her. "You have a life waiting there." Evelyn looked at the ranch, the barn, the fields, the mountains. Then she looked at him. "I thought having money would make me feel like I belonged." Tom waited, but it doesn't. The wind moved through the grass. "I spent years wishing people would see my worth." She placed her hand on the papers. "Now they suddenly do." Tom understood, because he had seen the same thing happen. People respected success, but they often ignored the person who struggled to reach it. "What will you do?" Evelyn looked toward the fading light. "I don't know." And that was the truth. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn had a choice. She could return to the life she lost, or she could stay with the life she built. But while Evelyn was deciding what future she wanted, Tom was quietly preparing himself for the possibility that he might lose her. Because he believed one thing: a woman who finally had the world opening its doors again would not choose a lonely rancher standing beside a town that never wanted her. And he was afraid he already knew the answer. Tom Hayes had faced angry cattle. He had faced winter storms that buried fence posts and left trails impossible to cross. He had faced years of silence after losing the family he once thought he would grow old with. But waiting for Evelyn to decide her future felt different. Because this time, there was nothing he could fight, no fence to repair, no trail to clear, no problem he could solve with hard work and a steady hand. He could only wait. And waiting had never been something Tom Hayes was good at. Over the next several days, Evelyn noticed the change, not a dramatic one. Tom did not become cold overnight. He did not leave the ranch or stop speaking to her, but small things disappeared. The morning coffee still appeared on the kitchen table, but Tom no longer sat across from her while they drank it. The evening conversations on the porch became shorter. When Evelyn showed him the updated ranch accounts, he thanked her politely instead of leaning over the table and asking questions like he used to. It was as if Tom had already started saying goodbye, and Evelyn noticed. She noticed because she had spent her entire life watching people leave before they had the courage to say they were leaving. One evening, she found him repairing a broken gate near the east pasture. The sun was dropping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the grass. Tom worked with a hammer in one hand and a piece of rough-cut wood in the other. "Do you need help?" He looked up. For a second, the old Tom was there. The man who had smiled when she first balanced the ranch books. The man who had listened when she spoke about her father. Then it disappeared. "No, I've got it." Evelyn stood there quietly. "You've been saying that a lot lately." Tom lowered his eyes back to the gate. "Saying what?" "I've got it." The hammer stopped. The wind moved through the pasture. Finally, Tom set the tool down. "Some things are easier when you handle them yourself." Evelyn looked at him carefully. That sounds like something you've believed for a long time. Tom did not answer, because she was right. He had built his entire life around that belief. After losing his wife and son, he had learned the safest way to survive was to need less hope, less attachment, less risk. But Evelyn had walked into his life and quietly started changing things without asking permission. She had filled empty rooms with warmth. She had turned cold meals into shared dinners. She had reminded him that a house could be more than walls and furniture. It could be a place where someone waited for you to come home. And now he was afraid of losing it. You should take the offer, Tom said. The words came so suddenly Evelyn almost missed them. What? The business in Missouri. She stared at him. You think I should leave? Tom looked toward the mountains. I think you deserve the chance. That isn't what I asked. His jaw tightened. Evelyn, no. Her voice was calm, but firm. You don't get to decide for me. Tom looked at her. For a moment she saw something in his eyes. Not anger, fear. I'm trying to do what's best for you. And how do you know what that is? He had no answer, because the truth was, Tom did not know. He only knew what he feared. He feared that Evelyn would realize she had outgrown the ranch. He feared she would look at him and see exactly what the town had always seen. A lonely man with nothing to offer. Evelyn stepped closer. You know what hurts the most? Tom stayed silent. When I arrived here, everyone decided who I was before they knew my name. Her voice softened. They saw my size, my clothes, my empty suitcase. She looked at him, and they decided I was less. Tom's expression changed slightly, but you were different. A long silence followed. Why? Tom looked away, because he knew the answer, and he was not ready to say it. Because you worked harder than anyone I'd ever seen. That's not the whole reason. Tom did not respond. Evelyn swallowed. I thought you were the one person who saw me. The words stayed between them, heavy, honest. Tom looked at her. I do see you. Then why are you trying to send me away? He had no simple answer. No safe answer. Finally, he said the thing he had been trying not to admit. Because I don't know how to keep something good without losing it. Evelyn's expression softened. For the first time, she saw past the quiet cowboy everyone feared. She saw the man underneath, the man who still carried an old wound, the man who believed happiness always came with a cost. Tom. He looked at her. I am not your past. The words were quiet, but they reached him. Tom looked down. I know. Do you? Another silence. This time he did not look away. That night, Tom barely slept. He sat at the kitchen table long after the lantern burned low, the same table where Evelyn had once written ranch reports, the same table where she had laughed with Henry, the same table where she had slowly become part of the place. He looked around the room, at the curtains she had repaired, the shelves she had organized, the small vase of wildflowers she had placed near the window. Things he had never thought about before, things he would notice now if they were gone. The next morning, Charles Bennett returned to the ranch. He brought additional documents, more details about Evelyn's inheritance. The business had been doing better than expected. With proper management, it could become even more profitable. You would have employees, Charles explained. Home in Missouri. Financial security. Evelyn listened. She thanked him, but she did not answer. Later that afternoon, she found Tom near the barn. He was saddling his horse. Going somewhere? Checking the north pasture. You just checked it yesterday. Tom paused. Yes, Evelyn understood. He was creating distance, not because he wanted to hurt her, because he was preparing himself. She stepped closer. Tom. He looked at her. I need you to stop deciding that you are already losing me. His face tightened. I'm not. You are. The honesty surprised him. Evelyn continued, I don't need a man who saves me. Tom lowered his eyes. I know. I don't need someone who gives me a place because he feels sorry for me. His eyes lifted. Never. I need someone who stands beside me. The ranch was quiet, only the sound of horses moving in the distance. Tom looked at her for a long moment. Then he said softly, You really believe you belong here? Evelyn answered without hesitation. Yes, not because of money, not because of the inheritance, not because of the ranch, because of everything she had built, everything she had survived, everything she had become. Tom nodded slowly, but before he could say anything else, a rider appeared at the ranch gate. Henry Dawson, he looked serious. Tom walked over. What happened? Henry removed his hat. Samuel Reed was seen meeting with two men from the county office. Tom's expression changed. What about? Henry looked toward the ranch house. Your land. Evelyn stepped closer. What does that mean? Henry hesitated. Then he answered. Samuel thinks if he can prove this ranch is unstable, he can force a sale. Tom stared toward the valley, the same valley where he had spent years building his life, the same land he had fought to protect. Evelyn looked at him, and she understood something. This was no longer only about her choosing between two lives. Someone was trying to take away the life they had built together. Tom had spent years protecting everything alone, but now, for the first time, he was not standing alone, and Evelyn was about to prove that she was not the woman who arrived in Silver Creek with one suitcase and nowhere to go. She was the woman who had survived every door that closed in her face, and she was not about to let someone close another one. For years, Evelyn Carter had believed survival meant enduring quietly, keeping her head down, accepting the places where people told her she did not belong, but standing beside Hayes Ranch, watching Samuel Reed try to take away the one place where she had finally found peace. Something inside her had changed. She was no longer the woman who arrived in Silver Creek, carrying one worn suitcase and a letter that led to disappointment. She had built something here, and she would fight for it. The first thing Evelyn did was open every account book in the ranch office. Tom watched from the doorway. You're working late. She did not look up. So are you. Tom glanced toward the papers spread across the desk. What are you looking for? The reason Samuel thinks he can challenge the ranch. Tom leaned against the doorframe. Evelyn, this isn't your fight. Her pen stopped. Then slowly she looked at him. That's the second time you've said something like that. Tom was quiet. This ranch is not just yours anymore. The words caught him off guard. Evelyn closed the ledger. When I came here, you gave me work. Not charity, not pity. Work. She placed her hand on the old wooden table. You trusted me with your books, your home, your livelihood. A pause. So yes, Tom, this is my fight too. For a moment, he simply looked at her, the woman who had once arrived afraid of every set of eyes watching her. Now she was sitting at his desk, sleeves rolled up, ink on her fingers, preparing to defend the place they had created together. And something about that gave him strength. The next morning, they rode into Silver Creek, not because they wanted approval, because they needed answers. The town looked different than it had months before. Or maybe Evelyn was the one who had changed. The same buildings stood along the muddy street. The same wooden sidewalks creaked beneath passing boots. The same mercantile had a faded sign hanging above the door. But the people looking at her were different. Some looked away. Some offered small greetings. Others watched carefully, unsure what to make of the woman who had once been the easiest person in town to dismiss. Tom and Evelyn stopped outside the county office. Inside, they found Samuel Reed speaking with a clerk. Samuel turned when they entered. His smile appeared immediately. Too quickly. Tom. Evelyn. What a surprise. Tom's voice was calm. We heard you've been asking questions about my property. Samuel folded his papers. I've been asking questions about the future of Silver Creek. Evelyn stepped forward. And how does taking someone's ranch help the town? Samuel looked at her. There it was, the same expression she had seen from people since arriving. The look that tried to measure her before listening to her. But this time she did not lower her eyes. Samuel smiled faintly. Mrs. Carter, you should be careful. Business matters can become complicated. I understand business. He raised an eyebrow. Do you? Evelyn held his gaze. I managed a household for years. I kept records. I handled purchases. I negotiated prices. She glanced at the documents in his hand. Something tells me you believe business only counts when a man signs the papers. The clerk behind the desk suddenly became very interested in his paperwork. Samuel's smile disappeared for a second. Then it returned. You've become confident. No, Evelyn said quietly. I became tired. The words landed harder than she expected. Even Tom looked at her, because he understood exactly what she meant. She had become tired of asking permission to exist. Samuel stepped closer. Confidence can become arrogance, Evelyn answered calmly, and power can become cruelty. The room went silent. Samuel looked at Tom. This is what you want standing beside you? Tom did not hesitate. Yes, one word, simple, clear. Samuel studied him. You're willing to risk everything for her? Tom looked at Evelyn, then back at Samuel. I'm willing to stand with my wife. The words surprised even Evelyn, not because they were untrue, because Tom said them without fear. Samuel's expression hardened. This isn't over. Tom nodded. I know. Samuel left. But the threat remained. Over the next week, the pressure increased. A supplier suddenly delayed a shipment of fencing materials. A bank representative arrived asking questions about the ranch's finances. A neighboring rancher withdrew from a cattle agreement he had made with Tom years earlier. None of it was illegal. That was what made it dangerous. Samuel was not attacking with a gun or the fist. He was using reputation. And reputation was something a frontier town understood. One evening, Henry Dawson found Tom outside the barn. He's trying to make you look unreliable. Tom tightened the strap on a saddle. I know. Henry looked toward the house. You got help now. Tom followed his gaze. Through the window, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table reviewing documents. She shouldn't have to fight my battles. Henry gave a quiet laugh. Tom, that woman has been fighting battles since before she met you. Tom looked at him. Henry adjusted his hat. Difference is, now she finally has someone standing beside her. That night, Tom found Evelyn still awake. The lantern burned low. The papers were stacked neatly. You should sleep, she looked up. So should you. Tom stepped into the room. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, I'm sorry. Evelyn looked surprised. For what? For thinking you needed saving. Her expression softened. You did save me. Tom shook his head. No. He looked around the room, at the books, the repaired furniture, the life she had quietly helped build. I gave you a chance, a pause. You saved yourself. Evelyn smiled slightly. That might be the nicest thing you've ever said. Tom almost smiled. Almost. Then his expression became serious. I meant what I said today, about being your wife? He nodded. Yes. Evelyn looked down. Tom, I know things are complicated. His voice became quieter. I know you have choices now. She watched him carefully. And what about you? He looked confused. What about me? You keep acting like I'm the only one who gets to choose. The room became still. Evelyn stood. You think I'm going to leave because I have money now? Tom did not answer, which was answer enough. She stepped closer. You still don't understand. Understand what? That I didn't stay because I had nowhere else to go. Tom looked at her. I stayed because I found somewhere I wanted to be. For the first time in a long while, Tom Hayes had no words. Outside, the wind moved across the fields, the same fields he had protected alone for years, the same place where he had convinced himself he would never need anyone again. Then Evelyn reached for his hand. Not dramatically, not with a grand promise. Just a simple gesture, a choice. Tom looked down at their hands, and for once he did not pull away. 3 days later, Silver Creek gathered for the annual cattle meeting. Nearly every important family in the valley attended. Ranch owners, merchants, town leaders, and Samuel Reed. He stood near the center of the crowd, prepared to make his final argument. Tom and Evelyn arrived together, not behind him, not beside him because she needed protection, beside him because they belonged there. Samuel stepped forward. I believe this town deserves to know what kind of decisions are being made. The crowd became quiet. He looked at Evelyn. Some people arrive with nothing and suddenly believe they deserve everything. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn felt the old sting, the familiar one, the one she had carried most of her life. But before she could answer, Tom stepped forward. Enough. The entire street went quiet. Tom Hayes was not a man who spoke often. When he did, people listened. You spent 5 minutes looking at her and decided what she was worth. His eyes moved across the crowd. I spent months watching what she did. Samuel's expression tightened. Tom continued, she works harder than most men I know. She keeps this ranch running. She helps people who have nothing because she remembers what it feels like to have nothing. He looked at Evelyn, then back at the town. You don't get to measure a person by what you notice first. No one spoke, not Martha Collins, not Samuel Reed, not anyone, because the woman who once stood alone in the mud was no longer standing alone, and everyone in Silver Creek knew it. But what none of them knew yet was that Evelyn and Tom were about to make a choice that would change both their lives forever. The choice was not about money. It was not about land. It was not about proving Samuel Reed wrong. It was about something much simpler. Choosing each other. The weeks after the cattle meeting were quieter than anyone expected. Samuel Reed did not disappear. Men like Samuel rarely did. But his influence had weakened. The town had watched Tom Hayes stand in the middle of Silver Creek and defend Evelyn without hesitation, and they had watched Evelyn stand beside him, not hiding behind his name or his reputation. Slowly, people began seeing what had been there all along. Not a woman chasing security, not a cowboy rescuing someone helpless. Two people who had built something together. Still, life at Hayes Ranch did not suddenly become easy. The mountains did not care about town gossip. The cattle still needed feeding, the fences still broke, the winters still arrived without mercy, and love, Evelyn learned, was not something that erased hardship. It was something that made hardship worth facing. One morning in early spring, Evelyn stood outside the ranch house with a basket of freshly washed clothes. The wind caught one of Tom's old shirts hanging on the line. It was faded, the sleeves were worn, the collar had been repaired more times than either of them could count. Tom walked past carrying a wooden bucket. He stopped. You fixed that again? Evelyn looked at the shirt. The seam was coming loose. You already fixed it twice, yes. Tom looked at her. Why? She shrugged. Because it still works. For a moment he said nothing, then he nodded. That's a good reason. It was a small conversation. Most people would not have remembered it. But Tom did. Because he had spent years believing everything broken was something to throw away. A house, a dream, a heart. Evelyn had shown him that some things were worth repairing, even if the repairs showed. Especially if they showed. By summer, the ranch had changed. Not because it was bigger, not because it had become famous, because it felt alive. The kitchen fire burned every morning. The dining table was no longer a place where Tom ate alone. The porch held 2 chairs instead of 1. Henry Dawson noticed first. He rode up one afternoon with a new supply list and looked around. "You know, Tom, I barely recognize this place." Tom looked up from the fence he was repairing. "What does that mean?" Henry glanced toward the house. "Used to feel like nobody lived here." Tom smiled faintly. "And now?" Henry removed his hat. "Now it feels like somebody's waiting for you to come back." Tom looked toward the window. Evelyn was inside organizing jars of preserved vegetables for winter. She looked up at that exact moment. Their eyes met. Neither waved, neither called out. They did not need to. That was the kind of understanding they had built. Quiet, steady, real, but Evelyn was not only changing Hayes Ranch. She had started noticing other women in Silver Creek who carried the same look she once had, the look of someone trying not to take up space. A young widow named Clara Whitfield became the first to visit often. At first, Clara came only for practical reasons. A question about planting vegetables, advice about keeping household records, a request for help writing a letter. But soon, the visits became something else. Friendship. One afternoon, Clara sat at the kitchen table while Evelyn repaired a torn dress. "I used to think people like Martha Collins had everything figured out," Clara said. Evelyn looked up. "Did you?" Clara smiled sadly. "No." She watched Evelyn's hands move through the fabric. "I think I just believed confidence looked a certain way." Evelyn folded the cloth. "What way? Like someone who never doubted themselves?" Evelyn laughed softly. "I still doubt myself." Clara looked surprised. "You do?" "Of course. Then how do you keep going?" Evelyn thought about it. Then she answered honestly. "Sometimes you keep going because you are afraid." Clara waited. "And sometimes you keep going because stopping would mean letting the people who hurt you be right." The words stayed with Clara because she understood them. Many women in Silver Creek did. Over time, Evelyn began helping more people, a ranch worker's wife who needed help keeping accounts, a young mother who needed extra income sewing clothes, a widow who needed work after losing her husband. Nothing grand, nothing that made newspaper headlines, just one person helping another. Tom watched it all. One evening, he found Evelyn sitting on the porch after sunset. "You know you don't have to fix everyone's problems." She smiled. "I know." "Then why do you keep trying?" She looked toward the valley. "Because someone once gave me a chance when nobody else would." Tom sat beside her. "You mean me?" Evelyn looked at him. "Yes," a pause. "But you never treated me like I was broken." Tom looked down at his hands. "I knew what it felt like." She understood. That was the thing that had connected them from the beginning. Not their differences, their wounds. Both had known what it meant to be left behind. Both had learned to survive. But now they were learning something else, how to live. That fall, the ranch faced its hardest challenge since Evelyn arrived. A harsh winter came early. Snow covered the mountain roads before supplies were fully delivered. Several cattle were lost during a sudden freeze. The repair costs from the storm damaged one of the barns. For a while, the old fear returned, the fear that everything they built could disappear. Tom spent long hours outside checking the herd. Evelyn spent long nights with the account books. One evening, she found him sitting alone in the barn. The lantern beside him was nearly empty. "You missed dinner." He looked up. "I wasn't hungry." She stepped inside. "You haven't been hungry for 3 days?" A small smile appeared. "No." Evelyn sat beside him. "You still do that?" "Do what?" "Try to carry everything alone." Tom looked away. "I'm responsible for this place, and I'm part of this place." He looked at her, the same words she had told him months before. Only now he understood them. "I don't know how to do this." Evelyn smiled gently. "Good." Tom frowned. "Good?" because neither do I." For a moment, they simply sat there. Then Tom laughed, quietly, almost like he had forgotten how. Evelyn leaned against his shoulder. And in that cold barn, surrounded by hay and the smell of leather and winter air, they remembered something important. They were not two people trying to survive alone anymore. They were a family. By the time spring returned, the ranch had recovered, the fences were repaired, the cattle were stronger, the fields were green again. And one morning, Tom placed a small wooden box on the kitchen table. Evelyn looked at it. "What is that? Something I should have given you a long time ago." She opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring, not expensive, not decorated, just carefully made. Her eyes lifted. "Tom." He looked uncomfortable, which made her smile. "I know we already made promises." He paused. "But I wanted you to have something that wasn't connected to fear." Evelyn touched the ring. "You mean because you were afraid I'd leave?" Tom gave a small nod. "Yes, and now," he looked at her, "now I know you stay because you choose to." That was the difference, not needing, choosing. Evelyn placed the ring beside the first one. Then she looked at him. "You know something?" "What?" "I came to Silver Creek thinking I had lost everything." Tom waited. "But I think I was wrong." She reached for his hand. "I had to lose the life I knew to find the one I was meant to have." Outside, the ranch stretched across the valley, the same land people once thought Tom would lose, the same place where Evelyn had once wondered if she belonged. Now it was home, and neither of them knew yet how many lives that home would eventually change. But the people of Silver Creek were beginning to understand something. The woman they once judged had become the person they turned to, and the cowboy everyone thought had no heart had built the strongest thing he had ever owned. Not a ranch, not a fortune, a family. That was the thing Evelyn Carter understood now. For years, she had believed winning meant proving everyone wrong, proving the people who laughed at her in Silver Creek had been mistaken. Proving the people who told her she would never belong had underestimated her. But as the years passed, she realized something different. The greatest victory was not watching people change their minds. It was no longer needing them to. The Hayes Ranch continued to grow, not quickly, not like the stories told in traveling newspapers. It grew the way most good things grew, slowly, through long days, through hard work, through people showing up when things became difficult. The ranch house that had once felt empty became a place where people came for advice, coffee, and sometimes just a quiet place to sit. The kitchen table became the center of everything. It held account books, letters, sewing supplies, fresh bread, and sometimes the worries of people who did not know where else to go. Evelyn never forgot what it felt like to have nowhere, so she made sure others always had somewhere. Years after she first arrived in Silver Creek, a young woman named Rebecca came to the ranch. She arrived with a small child, a worn coat, and a look Evelyn recognized immediately. The same look she had carried when she stepped off the stagecoach, a person trying not to be noticed, trying not to become a burden. Evelyn invited her inside without asking for explanations. She poured coffee. She gave the child a warm piece of bread, and only after they were comfortable did she ask, "What happened?" Rebecca looked down at her hands. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Evelyn remembered those words, not the exact sentence, but the feeling behind it. "I didn't know either," Evelyn said. Rebecca looked up. "You?" Evelyn smiled. "Yes." The young woman glanced around the warm kitchen, at the full shelves, the family photographs, the life that surrounded them. "You built all this?" Evelyn looked toward the window. Outside, Tom was helping their oldest son repair a fence post. Their daughter was chasing chickens near the garden. The ranch was loud, messy, alive. "I didn't build it alone." That answer became something people in Silver Creek heard often, because Evelyn never pretended she had survived everything by herself. She had Tom. She had Henry. She had the people who eventually chose kindness over judgment. But most importantly, she had learned to accept help, something the younger Evelyn never knew how to do. Tom changed too. The man who once avoided town gatherings became someone children ran toward. The man who once spent evenings alone in a silent house now sat on the porch with a cup of coffee while neighbors stopped by to talk. Henry Dawson never let him forget it. "You realize nobody's scared of you anymore?" Tom looked up from repairing a bridle. "Should I be worried?" Henry laughed. "No, but I do miss the days when people moved out of your way." Tom shook his head. "You're the only person who misses that. That's because I respected the mystery." Tom smiled. A real smile, the kind Evelyn had first seen only rarely, the kind that reminded her how much he had changed. Not because he became someone else, because he finally allowed people to see who he had always been. The years softened Silver Creek too, not all at once. Some people never apologized. Some people never admitted they had been cruel. But others did. Martha Collins eventually closed her dress shop. Age and changing times caught up with her. One afternoon, she came to the ranch carrying a small package. Evelyn recognized her immediately. For years, Martha had represented everything that once made Silver Creek painful: pride, judgment, a need to decide who mattered. But the woman standing at the door looked different, older, quieter. "I brought this for your daughter." Evelyn looked at the package. Inside was a beautifully sewn dress. The stitching was careful. The fabric was simple but elegant. "It's lovely," Martha nodded. "I made many dresses for women who wanted to look important." She paused. "But I don't think I understood what made someone important." Evelyn said nothing. She did not need an apology, but she accepted the gesture. Because healing did not always come from hearing the perfect words. Sometimes it came from seeing someone finally learn. Years passed. The children grew. The ranch expanded. The mountains remained the same, still standing, still watching. And every once in a while, a traveler would stop at the ranch and ask about the famous story. They wanted to know about the woman who arrived in Silver Creek with nothing. The woman who was laughed at in the street. The woman who married the quiet cowboy nobody understood. The stories grew bigger with every telling. Some said Evelyn had changed the entire territory. Some said Tom had fought half the town for her. Some said their love was the greatest romance in Colorado. Evelyn always found those stories amusing. Because the truth was much simpler. She had been tired, she had been scared, she had been hurt, and she had kept going. That was all. One evening, many years later, Evelyn sat on the porch with Tom. The sun was setting behind the mountains, the same mountains that had watched her arrive as a stranger. Their children were grown now. Their grandchildren played in the yard. The sound of laughter drifted across the ranch. Tom leaned back in his chair. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Evelyn smiled. "The mud? The mud." She laughed softly. "I thought Silver Creek was the worst place on earth." Tom looked toward the valley. "And now?" She looked around, at the ranch, at the people, at him. "Now I think it was the place that led me here." Tom reached for her hand, the same rough hands that had once carried a suitcase down a muddy road, the same hands that had learned ranch work, the same hands that had built a home. "You know what I remember?" "What?" "You standing there." Ev looked at him. "Alone." Tom shook his head. "No." He smiled. "Strong." For a moment she did not answer, because the woman who had arrived in Silver Creek would never have believed those words. Strong. She had spent so much of her life hearing what she was not. Too much, not enough, too different. But Tom had never looked at what the world criticized. He looked at what she survived. Years later, when Evelyn told her grandchildren about the old days, she never focused on the people who laughed. She focused on the choices, the choice to keep walking, the choice to accept kindness, the choice to believe that being different did not mean being less, and most importantly, the choice to love. Because that was the lesson she carried all her life. The world may decide your worth before knowing your story. People may judge what they see before understanding what you have survived. But the right person will not measure what you lack. They will see everything you fought to become. The woman who once stood alone in the mud became the heart of Silver Creek. The cowboy who once believed love only brought pain discovered that love could also bring him home. And the ranch that began as a place of loneliness became a place where people found hope. Not because Evelyn Carter proved she was worthy. She had always been worthy. She simply found the people who finally saw it. And that was more than enough. And maybe that is the part of Evelyn Carter's journey that stays with us the longest. Because if you had been standing in that muddy street in Silver Creek, carrying everything you owned in one worn suitcase, with strangers deciding your worth before they ever knew your name, would you have kept walking? Would you have believed there was still a place in the world where you could be seen, respected, and loved exactly as you were? Evelyn's story reminds us that sometimes the hardest battles are not fought against the wilderness outside us, but against the voices that convince us we are not enough. The people who truly belong in our lives are not the ones who measure our value by what they see at first glance. They are the ones who recognize the strength it took to survive the road that brought us there. Her greatest victory was never proving Silver Creek wrong. It was learning that she never needed their permission to be worthy. If Evelyn's journey touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. What moment in her story meant the most to you? And if you enjoy stories of love, healing, courage, and unexpected second chances, consider subscribing. There are many more unforgettable journeys waiting for you in the stories ahead.